Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the Islamic Vibez Podcast. I'm your host Majid, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Brother Affy and Brother Ishti. Assalamu alaikum, brothers, and welcome to the show.
Wa
Walaikum
alaikum
assalam wa
assalam.
rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Testing times. We're in testing times, and normally, I start off by asking how you guys are doing, but it just seems that at the moment, no one is doing well. Regardless of where they are. But I will pose a question anyway. How are you guys doing? And how's things?
Alhamdulillah, personally things are fine, but mentally, your heart, your brain is, with all these images and what's happening in Gaza and Palestine, it's horrible. It's beyond words.
Yeah, I think echo that. I think there's something seriously wrong with any of us if we're able to detach what's going on in Palestine from ourselves at any point. The videos that are constantly coming out, the news reports, everything that we're hearing, reading, seeing, if it's not agitating us into a position of reflect and what is actually happening and what's our role to play in this, then there's something seriously wrong. But Alhamdulillah, I sense something different about this this occurrence. I'm having conversations on a Aqeedah belief level with people who I would never have been able to have that discussion with whenever the attacks on Palestinians have occurred in the past. It's always been, on a partial level that we just need to get the killing to stop and get the fighting to stop. Now we're having a lot of deeper level discussions with people, which shows that when they're seeing these videos, and some of them are hard hitting, even if you don't see videos of the bodies, when you're hearing the messages that the brothers and sisters from Palestine are giving to us, it's making people reflect that, am I doing an injustice to them? So I think on that side, you draw positives, but the reality is our brothers and sisters are being butchered.
Of course, and that is the reality. And one thing that, to put things into perspective, though, is when you witnessed what's been happening, and you witnessed the resolve of the people in Palestine, it really puts things into perspective that, our lives are full of luxuries. We literally live like royalty, and if we have things to complain about, when you put things into context and perspective, puts you to kind of shame the sort of first world problems that we experience and we complain about. But let's get into the topics, guys. And there's a couple of topics, inshallah, I want to cover today with you guys. As we know, the event, since October the 7th, and the onslaught has been going on for over a month now. And the numbers of people, made shaheed, you're talking, officially 11,000, but people are talking about how, they're walking past rubble and they can hear voices, but they can't do anything to take them out. So in reality, that number is going to be much higher. We've seen the events in the last couple of days with the hospitals, and especially the Al-Shifa hospital, where currently, the reports are coming out where certain wards have been totally wiped out. Patients have been told to leave the hospital by the settler forces, and it's basically babies are waiting to die because of the help that they need. So with all this happening, we've seen many protests around the world. We witnessed a huge protest in the UK, in London yesterday. People calling for a ceasefire. I was reading not long ago, President Erdogan of Turkey, making a statement about, the US has to do something. The US has to put a stop to this. The US has to call for a ceasefire. And as we know, in many of the nations involved in this, the Zionist entity itself and its main supporters have up until now refused to call for a ceasefire. But I'm going to open this conversation with a question which many people actually might find controversial. Okay, but I'm sure, inshallah, throughout the discussion and wherever you guys stand on this, I'm sure things will become a bit more clearer, and it won't seem as controversial as it did, at the first point. So the question really is that, as Muslims, do we want a ceasefire? Should we be calling for a ceasefire? Now, there have been various opinions on this. I mean, the majority is, of course, because people are dying. We need to put a stop to this killing. And the only way this is going to happen is if there's a ceasefire and end of hostilities. However, I have, encountered other people who have actually said, no, this is not the time for a ceasefire. As Muslims, we shouldn't have a ceasefire. So, Affy, I'm going to raise the question to you for a start. Should there be a ceasefire? Yes or no?
I think the question is flawed from the very, very start. It's an incorrect question to be asking. And I think the people who ask this question and who push for a ceasefire are those people who don't understand the reality of what's going on in Palestine. And as you said, there was 1 million people, so they say, yesterday, who marched for Palestine and saying that we're showing solidarity for you, for the people in Palestine. And as solidarity, we're calling for a ceasefire. I've not heard or seen any video that's come out of Palestine where they're saying ceasefire, stop bombing. There may be a couple, but that's not the overwhelming opinion that's come out. So the question then comes back to, what is actually going on in Palestine? What is it that you perceive this situation to be that's making you call for a ceasefire? If this is two warring countries or two warring factions fighting with each other, and therefore there's people who are dying in the middle, that's when you call a ceasefire, because you want an end to the hostilities and the fighting that's going on. What's going on in Palestine is organized, systematic bombings and killing of Muslims for being Muslim. They're using the excuse of what happened on the 7th of October. I don't think everyone buys that anymore. It's what's going on is a genocide. So you've got to understand what is the cause of this. It's not 7th of October. This situation is one of an occupier versus the occupied. And the occupier is actually bombing the hell out of the occupied. Is that a ceasefire situation, or is that one where actually the occupier should be repelled? The occupier should be removed. This is an issue of liberation, not an issue of two warring factions here. So my message to anyone out there is, if you're calling for a ceasefire, and yeah, look, we said it earlier on at the start of this, right? It hurts us when we see the people under the rubble, the messages that people are giving to their loved ones, half blown up bodies and amputations all over the place. It kills us. But for us, in my mind, to call for a solution other than what the Palestinian people and Muslim brothers and sisters are calling for is an injustice to them, and is in fact not showing solidarity for our brothers and sisters in Palestine. Instead, is showing solidarity for the Westerners who, let's be honest, the callers of the ceasefire were the very people who started off by saying Israel has a right to defend itself. They're the same people who were justifying the attacks that Israel did on Gaza. And now all of a sudden they're starting to come out and start talking about ceasefire. So I think, we need to look at the context of what's going on in Palestine. What is that real battle? And therefore the solution automatically comes about.
Interesting. I mean, there's loads to, I would say, unpackage there, and I'm sure we will do. But before that, I just want to get Ishti's thoughts on the question as well. A flawed question, as Affy puts it. But what are your thoughts, Ishti?
Look, I agree with everything Affy said there, but what I will say is, when I've been speaking to Muslims, and with the gruesomeness and the brutality that you see in these videos of children and babies dying, you can see that most Muslims actually just want the killing to stop. But the problem is, when you speak to them, what the status quo, what a ceasefire actually means, it means to return to the original state and accept that as being okay. Even their own sources, the UN, Amnesty International, all these people have said it's unacceptable, it's apartheid, it's genocide, these guys are being bled to dry, and this is what we're calling to. And like Affy said, it's a total injustice of the Palestinian people called for. These are the people living this, right? Bombing and killing is what we just see, but what about day to day? And Islamically, is this what we want? These people have been robbed of land. They've been robbed of everything. And then what? A ceasefire is that gonna sort of calm us seeing these images, or actually going to resolve their issue? And that's the real question we've got to ask. What is the ceasefire there for? Is it to resolve their issues and put it to bay so we can't see it anymore, or actually resolve the problem at its heart and what is actually happening here? How do we get rid of this oppression, this injustice, and what we've seen, a genocidal, not just a regime, a genocidal regime that want to get rid of a people? And I think that's what people need to understand. What are we actually calling for? What does a ceasefire actually mean? What was the original state in that place? And I've been reading myself, and I didn't even appreciate how extreme their situation is. It's absolutely ridiculous. Their water, their land, their access in or out. Before this 7th of October was controlled, they have no airspace. They have no control of their water. They're given a portion. So we're saying we want to go back to this norm. And, just speaking about it, it makes you emotional, because you think, how can anyone accept this? This is worse than the prisons that you have. So we have to understand what you're actually calling for. And I think that's what most Muslims need to understand. What is a ceasefire? What are the terms that are putting there? And we also need to give them the history of this regime, because it is a regime. They've used their machinations, they've used their laws to their advantage, to gain more and more land and to oppress them. And this is why they have to be the victim. This is part of the European subjugation of Jews, rather than what's happening in Palestine, which is all of their own making.
Yeah, some really, really good points there. And from what both of you guys have said, I think if we try to look into this and break this down then, because I think majority of people, like Ishti just said as well, that want a ceasefire, I think basically it's about just wanting the murder to stop. And that's understandable. I think that's understandable. Any human, well, not every human, but anyone with any bit of empathy within them and compassion would want the end to civilians, innocent people being butchered, basically, which they are. Now, I think the issue of ceasefire, then, let's probably look into this a bit more. Now, we obviously don't know the conditions, but just say now there is a ceasefire. Okay, I guess probably some of the conditions might be that the hostages or as some other people would describe, the prisoners of war would be released, and the violence would stop. Okay, so let's just put that. I think there would be a lot more, even if there was a ceasefire. And something that Affy pointed out was that the same people who originally were not up for a ceasefire are now calling for a ceasefire. And I think that's because you have political games being played here. There's an objective that needs to be met, and they're only going to call for the killing to end when they've met certain objectives. But let's go to the fact that, okay, there's these minor conditions in regards to what may happen, what may not happen. And in reality, it's probably going to be far worse, because there's going to be stipulations on the Zionist part in regards to security and this and that of the region, maybe more land being taken. Maybe they have, armed forces on the ground. Okay, but let's just say now the fighting stops. Okay, the fight. Okay, actually, let's not say fighting. I think that's a bit of an injustice. The killing stops, because as Affy pointed out, it's not like two nations are at war, right? It's just one-way genocide. Okay, now this violence stops. So now for people who think a ceasefire is a solution, okay, now the bombs have stopped raining down on the people. What's the scenario on the ground? Let's just, some of this might be hypothetical, but let's just, picture what's going to be the situation on the ground. Affy, if that question makes sense. Let's try to break it down. In Gaza, what's going to be the situation on the ground?
And we know that at some point it's going to stop, right? Because this is a political situation, and anyone who understands the political landscape of the region, the Palestinian issue, the origins of it, and the recent history, and the American administration standpoint and viewpoint on the issue, it is going to stop. And it's Netanyahu's political careers on the line. Best case scenario, as far as some Muslims are be concerned, he might get done for war crimes, right? They might even do him for those. Okay, he gets that. But it comes back down to your point, and this is the crux of it. What happens next in Gaza or in Palestine as a whole? We know that Gaza is pretty much destroyed. And it's not just, parts of it. They're expanding, and you're seeing the consequences of the displacement of people and people escaping to other parts of Palestine as well. So Palestine is effectively becoming smaller. There were a number of refugee camps already. Now, I know someone personally, his entire family, extended family, have lost their house and they're living out of a school hall. So these people are now going to be effectively refugees on their own land. So there's going to be a massive issue there, right? Infrastructure has been totally destroyed. So, from for choice of a better word, humanitarian element of it, it's going to be a disaster for decades, right? Because how you haven't been able to rehouse people who were displaced during Nakba, right? And now it's effectively going to be worse because the entire Gaza strip is going to be destroyed. But the killing stops, right? So I worry that the positive change that we've seen in the Muslims is just going to plateau out and go back to normal. Because like you said, it's questioning a lot of people have started to question themselves when they're seeing the resilience and the taqwa of the Muslims in Palestine. Is awakening something inside of us and putting us to shame, that actually they're sacrificing, and they're sacrificing the ultimate, that what we hold on daily to, money, life itself, family. They're giving it all in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're saying it's okay, our reward is coming next. And this is getting Muslims to think about this issue in a completely different way. And I worry that when this stops, it goes back to normal. The talks of normalization are going to resume, because no one's denounced normalization. The League of Traitors, who met over the last 24 hours or yesterday, have announced they came out with a pansy statement, which didn't mean anything, putting pressure on the UN to denounce the situation and call it a genocide. So we know where their stance is, and I think overwhelmingly people have seen this. So they're going to resume normalization. America's pushing for this two-state solution. Blinken himself, despite saying Israel has a right to defend itself and they could go and do whatever they want, is openly saying that actually Palestinians should have their own state. What does that mean? So it comes back down to that two-state solution, and anyone who's got any ounce of intelligence about them would go and read as to what does this two-state solution mean, and read on paper what the agreements of this historic agreement is, and what that means for the Palestinians. And what you then find is that if that is enacted, which effectively a ceasefire is calling for, is going to be, and this is a wake-up call to the Muslims, it's going to be us as the generation who gave away the third holiest site in Islam, and one that we're probably more emotionally attached to because of what's going on. Obviously we know the Haram and the Prophet's mosques have a higher status because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes, and Muhammad talks about the reward that we get from them. But the Al-Aqsa issue, because of its occupied status and the historic significance, sorry, just to go a little bit off tangent, I was talking to a brother last night who had visited Palestine, and his young son, 16, 17 years old, said to him while they were in Al-Aqsa, he goes, Dad, I'm glad we came, because let's put this into context. Third holiest mosque, right? This is where Muhammad Sallallahu took the night journey to, right? Which he was ridiculed by the Quraysh for, right? When he said that I did the night journey, ascended into heaven. All the prophets gathered together to be led in prayer by Muhammad Sallallahu on this land, right? And then you look on the walls and you see bullet holes. And his little kid is telling to him, Dad, how shameful on us that on this land, these dogs are able to come in at ease, control who comes in. They don't even let half of the Palestinians in. And they could come in with dogs, shoot the walls, walk away like nothing's gone on. And effectively, for us now not to act a step further, a few steps further than we have historically, we are allowing that situation to occur. And we are permanently allowing it to happen by allowing this two-state solution to occur.
Okay. You've said loads there. So before I come to Ishti, what I want to do is kind of like refocus it on where I want to try to get at this scenario of post ceasefire, because you both have touched upon it, to be honest with you. Ishti's spoken about the condition that they were living in before October the 7th. And obviously, Affy, you've spoken about, the reality on the ground, people dying and so on and so forth after October the 7th. But what I'm just trying to get clear and trying to break it down for people is that there's now, just say, a ceasefire, okay? Killing has stopped. Now, Affy, you mentioned at the beginning that this is an issue of occupation. And the issue of occupation requires resistance. Resistance for what? To remove the occupation, right? Now, one thing we can accept is the occupation is still going to be there, okay? The land that they had in Gaza is now going to be less than it was before this latest violence. The majority of it has been destroyed. The refugees have been made refugees once again in their own land. The normalizers are going to come around and continue their normalization like they've been doing by bypassing the people on the ground, the Palestinian people, by just normalizing with these Yahud, right? So at the end of the day, the killing has stopped, but what are we left with? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Now, Affy talked about there's an occupation, it requires liberation. And the ceasefire stops the killing. But for Muslims now, what's next? And I think that's what I'm trying to break down in my head, that you're in a worse situation now than you were before. The situation before was not acceptable. So how can this situation be acceptable? And what I want to throw to you, Ish, to get some clarification on this, is also the question of, is this whole issue more than just the issue of people dying? Because if the issue is killing and people losing their lives, then a ceasefire achieves that, in the sense, like, for now at least, people will stop being killed. But this whole issue of Palestine, Quds, Al-Aqsa, is it just about saving people's lives, or is it something greater? Anyways, over to you. Just get your thoughts, bro.
I'm going to use something that was said in one of your previous talks, actually. The fact that we're Muslims and we believe in the Quran, as far as I'm concerned, we don't need no visas to go to Al-Aqsa. It should be that we as Muslims can go there, because that Quran is our visa, because that links us to that land of Al-Aqsa. It's part of our belief, right? And that's how we should see it. It should be an eternal issue, because at the end of the day, every day that they're there is a problem for them. I want to just give you one small instance of the level of subjugation that these people have been under, right? And I've only been reading about it recently, right? In 1967, they had a war, and after the war, they took control totally of the water supply, right? Total control of the water supply. Now, let me explain to you what that actually means, right? Every part of water, any new well or anything, it is under Israeli control, even if it's on Palestinian land. That order is going to stay there. What that means is they apportion amount of water based on a 1995 population to the Palestinians. So they starve them of water whilst they provide twice the water to the Israelis, so they can have swimming complexes, so the Palestinians can have just enough to live. Forget about agriculture, right? The rainwater, anything gets destroyed or confiscated. They use water just to humiliate our brothers. This is a daily occurrence, our brothers and sisters, right? This is the level we're dealing with, and they're using laws from 1995, and this is what's going to come to. This war is going to end. There will be a ceasefire, but you're dealing with one of the most devious and dangerous regimes in the world, right? The simple fact is this, right? We've seen the Arab, what's it called? The Arab summit that we saw recently, where Saudi, Morocco, UAE, and Bahrain they disagreed on them. What we see is they're passing the buck onto the UN. It is the UN that allowed this occupation to happen. They are the one that define these borders. But let me tell you one thing. Did you know Israel does not have any defined borders? Why? Because they're devious. They know if the day they define borders, they will have to go back to them. And they want more land. Right? They are the only country that do not have a defined border by themselves for that one very reason. Yeah? And they are only there to subjugate and destroy the Palestinian people. But as Muslims, right, I think the first and most important thing is we need to educate ourselves what this actually meant. First, understand Al-Aqsa is part of us. It's not the Palestinian people, right? It is a Muslim issue. And they're not killing them because they're Palestinians. They're killing them because they're Muslims, right? Number one, right? Number two, let's look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Look at the life of Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhu when they sent people to take that land over. While Khalid ibn Walid was entrenched in Iraq, Abu Bakr still wanted to take that land, and he was the first one to send the people, and it was granted to Umar radiallahu anhu. This is the history. This is our history, right? They're removing the indigenous people, the ones who have lived there for generation upon generation. They can actually produce you the deeds from the Ottoman times, even before that. And they're being removed. So in every single level, we need to understand what is going on here, but first and foremost, and what upsets me a little, when you go to the masjids, what are we adopting? Non-Muslim solutions, boycotts, protests to an entity that hates us and subjugates us. But nobody asks, what did the Prophet ﷺ say? What does the Quran say? What does the Hadith say? What is the Islamic solution? Because that is our first step. Because when you think about this, right, you know, I was thinking about this, right? On the day of the Battle of the Trench, Khandak, right? If you think about this, people have come from a different land and they're surrounded. And the Messenger ﷺ is amongst them. What does the Messenger ﷺ remind them of? That you came, they're attacking you because of the deen. Not because of your belief that I am the Prophet, is your belief in Allah and that you believe the rule of Allah is paramount. It's what you live for, right? That's how you should see the situation. They're not attacking you, they're attacking us. They're, on the day of judgment, they're going to be able to stand and say, we were powerless, but we've got a voice. We've got leaders. These are our leaders. We need to understand what is our relationship to and change the situation. What are we actually calling for? We've got armies sitting there. We've got resources sitting there. If you look at Turkey, 350,000 active military, right? So that's Navy, Army, Air Force, right? Saudi Arabia, 250. Pakistan, 500,000. So we've got military resources. We've got actual resources like mineral fuel, all that kind of stuff. We've got the resort. We've got so much ability, but what's happening? We are being stopped. We need to understand what are those barriers. Our leaders, the understanding that these do not represent us, but they are actually puppets of that do not represent us. They are the puppets of the West. If you see their actions, are they in line with what Islam wants? What we want? No. And I think that's the most important things, because these are the things that keep these discussions alive. And I feel like I'm veering off from your answer, but I think this is what every person needs to understand, that, you know, these people do not represent us, and these are the people that need to be acting. I was reading about Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimullah, right? You know, not many people know him, and they consider him as just a scholar of Islam, but he actually waged war. And in fact, he was so influential, he was actually able to raise armies, and he sent a letter to the leader, right? When in the time of the Mongols, and they called it Sham then, Syria, Greater Syria, right? And he said to them that if you do not raise an army, then we will raise a Khalif, that will resolve this issue. I will replace you, because this is your responsibility. That's what it means to be a Muslim leader. It's not a leader that is a Muslim leader. He is one who represents the Muslims. And this is what we should expect. And he was not a leader, he was a scholar, but he was influential and used that. We should push our scholars. You know, the teachers, our imams, what are they talking about? Are they actually calling to Islam or to the solutions proposed? And you know, the reality is some of them don't even know what they're doing. So obviously you've got to speak to them gently. Like, this is not from Islam. Come on, where in Syria can you find this? So I think I've jumped to the conclusion on this subject, but I think it's important that we need to start thinking about these lines, not just thinking of what they're asking for, but what is the actual Islamic solution.
Yeah, I think that's really important, bro, to be honest with you, because even the issue of protests or boycotting, in themselves, they can be useful. However, when we're looking at this issue of ceasefire, just thought about this when you were speaking. We're asking for a ceasefire. Who are we asking to enforce this ceasefire?
Exactly, and this is the point. This is the one thing that the Americans said. Sorry to interrupt, right? And this is one point I was going to make. When's the ceasefire going to come? When Israel thinks it's appropriate. Not America, it's when Israel. And what does that mean? Israel will dictate the narrative.
That's the point.
Supported unilaterally with America and the UK.
That's the point. So, if you're looking at it from a UN point of view, just think how the useless, I mean, we don't have any hope in it anyway, but because UN equals the United States, but the UN itself in 1948, passed the, I want to say resolution, but, established a state of Israel. Yeah. So this body was able to establish them. However, it's never been able to enforce a single UN resolution against them. Right. And that's the reality of it. So when we're saying we want a ceasefire, actually, who's going to enforce this ceasefire? Because, like you said, it's going to be when they are happy that, okay, we've achieved certain political objectives, and now we're going to stop this. So in reality, then, what are we calling for? Who are we asking? And I think that's important, because if you think about it, when we make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? You ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for victory. You ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the liberation of Palestine and stop the oppression. You don't ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a ceasefire. But He's the one who has the ability to do anything, right? And everything. So here, even it's flawed, this concept of asking for a ceasefire, because who are you asking? Who's going to enforce it? These guys are bombing hospitals live on TV. They don't care. They have been given a blank check. They're being given a license, and this actually leads on to my kind of understanding on this issue to do with the ceasefire. And I think, to be honest with you, what it boils down to, I think the Ummah has failed the Muslims in Palestine and this cause. And what's the cause? The cause for liberation. I think the Ummah has failed. Why? Because when you're looking at the issue of the ceasefire itself, you're talking about a time when the resistance on the ground have destroyed, blown out of the water, this myth that the settler entity is invincible. So this is being seen by many people now. We've seen a lot of, like Affy was saying, we've seen a lot of Muslims now questioning their own deen and questioning their Aqeedah and where they stand on this, right? We've seen that normal Muslims now have been able to establish that the rulers that are in place in the Muslim lands are just puppets and are treacherous. We've seen that the Muslims have acknowledged that the actual solution for the occupation and the liberation is for the Muslim armies to enter the stage and to stop the killing and to liberate Palestine. So this is the normal thing now when you're speaking with Muslims. So you can see people have sensed this now, but they can also sense that actually the armed forces, they're being held back by these treacherous regimes. So you see that there has been a trajectory going upwards in regards to how Muslims are viewing this issue now, how we're feeling, and what we are seeing now is being the solution, right? So now is the time. I was going to say was the time. I know things are dying down a bit, but now is the time for the Ummah, not the people in Gaza, not the people in West Bank. It's for the Ummah to do their bit. Because I tell you something now, the people on the ground in Gaza, the people on the ground in West Bank, and all the other areas of Palestine, right? They are doing their bit. They've taken it to the extent of what they can do. And they're still giving they're still battering those tanks in Gaza, right? But they've taken it to where they can. So it falls on the rest of the Ummah. What are we going to do? How, and it links to also what you said, Ishti, about the Aqeedah link, like what Affy was saying as well, to that land. So it's not just about saving people, saving lives. It's the whole place has a significant meaning to us. So now was the time, or is the time? I don't want to talk in the past tense, right? Now is the time when the rest of the Ummah has to play its part. And I feel that if a ceasefire comes in now, and it's only going to come when they want it to come in, when it comes in, unfortunately, what we're going to do is that element of guilt, that element of shame that we're feeling right now is going to dissipate, it's going to go. Because, okay, now, you know what? The killings have ended. But the reality on the ground hasn't changed. It has changed. It's become worse. So if on the ground the people are saying we want this bombing to stop, we want a ceasefire, I can totally understand that. Whether they are, whether they're not, I'm not entirely sure, because I know there are the fighting's going on. The people on the ground resisting, that resistance is going on. But look, people are human beings, man. There's only a certain amount you can take. You want this to stop, because it's not attacking armed forces, it's attacking civilians. So you can see that. But for the rest of the Ummah, we're not the ones where we're not the people who has the bombs falling down on them. So we should be calling for the solution, to actually not to give them some respite, give them some time to breathe, 5 minutes to breathe until the next friggin' onslaught, to actually look for a permanent solution to the problem. And that's the way I see it, that they're doing their bit. The question is, are we doing our bit? And in that context, when we talk about the ceasefire, I feel that we are letting down the cause. We are letting down those people who have sacrificed, done everything they can to stop this. These people could have taken the easy route a long time ago. They could have taken compensation money. They could have gone to Jordan. They could have gone to America. They could have gone to other places. They could have left this land. But they've decided not to do it. There's reports where, people on the ground who are being told, look, there's a safe route through through Rafah into Egypt. And the question was asked, yeah, but, are we going to be able to return when it's all over? And the answer was, we're not sure. And the old lady said, I ain't going nowhere. Because they understand the bigger game. They understand if they leave, then the Nakba of 48 and the years after is going to just continue. So I think that's where, and look, people might find this controversial, but try to understand what the brothers are saying here, that it's flawed. This concept of ceasefire from a point of view, Islamic point of view, is flawed. Not just the fact that it doesn't change anything, the fact that, is this even the solution? Who are we asking to enforce this ceasefire? It's not the Muslim lands. They're not going to enforce this. These same rulers are happy to send their drones to Azerbaijan, and the Saudis are more than happy to bomb the poorest country in the region, Yemen. Obliterate lands, kill so many tens of thousands of people. The Turks send people to Libya. They do use their armed forces, at times, but only when it serves their, agenda. So that was just my thoughts, and I guess it's kind of in line with what you guys are saying, and I hope it's given some context to this question of a ceasefire or no ceasefire, and I think it's easy for us to call for a ceasefire where we are, because we're not experiencing what's going on now, and we're not going to experience it going forward. However, if the people on the ground have shown a fight, have shown that they're not going to give up their right, they're not going to give up Al-Aqsa, they're not going to be subjugated, then we should be able to do twice as more. You know, the people in Gaza can't even leave Gaza. They've been like that for 16 years. We don't have that problem. We have a voice. We can speak out. We can, speak the truth. We can call out. But if this ceasefire comes into play, and another thing which maybe Affy wants to delve a little more into, is that ultimately there's political games being played. They're going to push this two-state solution. As Muslims, is that what we want? Again, all of these things that are being proposed are actually against Islam and against Muslims, are not from Islam. Affy, what you saying?
If I could just add something, and it's something that you started touching on, which is so important for people to realize, right? We've had 75 years of occupation of Palestine, at least 3 generations of people, right? Yet they haven't given up the defense of that land. And this is atrocity after atrocity, being isolated from the rest of the Muslim world because no one's come in to support them. Egypt had a chance, but then, the traitor who was in charge recalled them when they had the chance to go in and really deal a fatal blow to the occupiers. But then the command came, withdraw. So, and then, just in our lifetime, how many times have we seen the bombing and the attacks on the Muslims within Palestine, be it Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem, or, the Al-Aqsa storm, from when they just completely took over in Ramadan, gone, and what was happening in East Jerusalem with the Sheikh Jarrah region as well. This is happening periodically, right? And despite all of this, the defense, the noble defense of the brothers and sisters in Palestine hasn't waned, it hasn't deteriorated, it's remained strong. And you do hear from people, I was watching a video today where a guy said, trying to recall his exact words, but he said, I am from the generation of the Intifada, right? I have seen 3. And this one is the worst, but we're not going to lose hope. We're going to carry on. So we know that if after 75 years, alhamdulillah, they haven't given up, then they ain't going to give up anytime soon. Whether a two-state is agreed by the rest of the world or not, they're going to want that land, right? And they're going to defend that land. So this is the message out to everyone. This is not going to end. The bombing might stop, but the situation is not going to end. It's only going to get worse. And by allowing that more international involvement, as what's occurring now, where they're fighting just the illegal state of Israel, the 2 million people in Palestine will be fighting the whole world, including the 52 traitors who met yesterday, right? They're going to be part of this. So this is only going to get worse. So what you're calling for isn't a ceasefire, it's a further isolation of our brothers and sisters in Palestine.
Yeah, strong words, bro. And you know what? It might sound harsh, but at the end of the day, it is the reality. It is the reality. We need to shoulder our responsibility, and a ceasefire really kicks the can down the road. I think that's the phrase. And I think also it could be an element of, that's it. We've done our bit. Ceasefire's happened, and I can get back to my normal day-to-day life now. I don't need to watch what's happening on Al Jazeera, and I don't need to see these horrific images. But on the ground, nothing has changed, and I think that's the key thing. That's the key thing, and that's why I'm saying that if it was the people on the ground who are actively calling for the ceasefire, I can totally understand that. I can totally understand that. But the rest of the Ummah, with some of the resources that Ishti talked about, it's so obvious what the solution is. We have the capability, we have the means to go in and stop this killing. It's, even if one of these nations, tried to call the Zionist bluff and said, we're sending in our troops, right? Even if it was half-hearted and they didn't mean it, that would be something. But, when you have such a powerful nation like Turkey asking the US to stop this, wait a minute, these are your brothers and sisters. Why are you talking and asking those to stop it who have said that Israel has a right to defend itself? We stand with Israel, even questioning how many people have actually died, right? We really need to ask these questions. I know they're hard questions, but just think about it. As Muslims, we are looking to the enemies to solve our problems. How does that make sense? And you know what? I know people will say, well, look, you don't understand. You're not a leader. There's so many things you need to think about. You have to think about your own nation, and it's going to be, it's not easy. Look, who said it's supposed to be easy? Who said it's supposed to be easy? Was it easy at the Battle of the Trench? Was it easy at Uhud? Was it easy at Yarmouk? Who said it's supposed to be easy? And the responsibility of a leader is far more than responsibility of a normal civilian. You have an opportunity to, engrave your name into legacy. You sacrifice. If the people in Gaza can see Jannah, or saying that, whatever they're experiencing in Jannah, it's going to be worth it because they have conviction in the ayats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, then when you have people who are so powerful, not helpless, not under siege, besieged like the people in Gaza, people who have authority, not just authority in their own country, people have authority where people around the world rally for them. You need to make these hard decisions. But the point is, and Ishti nailed it, we're looking for all these solutions and they're not Islamic solutions. A ceasefire, it's not an Islamic solution in the context of what's it going to bring about. Is it going to bring about good for Islam? Is it going to bring about good for Muslims? In fact, it's not going to do It's not going to do anything. All it's going to do is alleviate the sense of responsibility that Muslims around the world are feeling now. That's all that's going to happen. And then there will be another Gaza. Right now, West Bank, the area has been, they kind of besieged. If you read the news right now, the Muslims can't, the main road that leads them out of, the areas which are populated by the Muslims in West Bank, they are like blockaded now.
They're always besieged. They're always besieged.
Okay, they're always besieged.
They're always besieged.
So maybe their suffering is not as great as those in Gaza, but it's still a sense of subjugation, suffering. And I think, look, that's the main point. And what I want is people to try to understand where we're coming from and to actually just think about it. Just think about it. We have to refer back to the Quran and the Sunnah. And, if we're talking about from an Islamic point of view, I'm going to give you the Islamic opinion now. The Islamic opinion is, if Muslims are occupied, they have to fight jihad, defensive jihad, to repel the occupiers. If they can't do that, if they're unable to do that, then this responsibility moves on to the surrounding Muslims. And if they can't do that, it moves until it could be that the whole world, the Muslims around the world, it's a fard ayn on them. Right? This is the Islamic solution. So why are we not calling for the Islamic solution? And look, these treacherous leaders have shown they're not going to move. So people might argue, well, why are you asking for something that's not going to happen? Okay, then change what you're asking for. Ask for their removal. If they're the obstacle, they need to go. But what it boils down to is whether we're willing to put our necks out to learn our own deen, to strengthen our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and take a leaf out of the book of the people of Palestine and put everything on the table. Do you know what I mean? That's what it boils down to, whether we want to do that or whether we want to just take people might think this is, I don't want people to be offended, but the easy route of calling for protests or calling for boycotts, they might seem achievable, but in reality, they're not. They're not going to change anything. They've never changed anything. So I think, to be honest,
can I make one small point?
Yeah, of course, go for it.
And to be honest, just whilst we were talking, right, I was just thinking about why we call the Prophet ﷺ noble, the noble Prophet ﷺ, right? And there's an aspect of it that he always stuck to, the principle of Islam, right? And that's what gave him nobility, not what the world, not what everyone thinks about him, right? When he was attacked in the time of the Taif, right, he was attacked with stones, but what was his dua? To make them believers. And he was worried that it was his work that may have not, brought him to Islam. When he said about cutting the hands, he said, even if Fatima does it, well, cut her hand, right? His nobility came from the understanding and the acceptance of the principle of Islam. And this is the only thing that is going to give us nobility and give us honor. If we're one of those who out of shame is having to boycott us and then go to the West solutions, then we will never be honored. We will never gain that nobility. We will never be on the principle of the Prophet ﷺ, right? And if we don't know the principle, then go learn it. If we don't know the solutions, then ask or find them, because they're all available to us. And it was just a thought that I had. When we look at what's going on with the international law, it's only there to police the Muslims. Oh, what happened in Iraq? There's got this, that, the other. What's happening in Iran? It's there to create division between Sunni within the Muslim world, right? That didn't exist before, right? But now look at them. They are willing to abide by every single attack that's happening on the Muslims because they are totally ignoble. They are totally against the ways of Islam, right? And if we truly want honor, then we need to remember it is only the principle and the ideals of Islam that will honor us. And then we can call ourselves of the honored few, inshallah. And, it's a reminder to myself, but I thought I'd share this thought I was just having while you were talking.
Yeah. I mean, Umar radiallahu anhu said, didn't he, that it was Islam that, gave us honor and izzah. And if we look to anything else for honor and izzah, then we will just receive humiliation. And I mean, what I want the people watching this or listening to this is, whether you agree or you don't, just think about this. Just really, think about what's being said and not just follow the narrative that's being pushed. And I think that's really important, and obviously you can add your comments into the video, YouTube video and all that sort of stuff. And it would be good to hear from people what they think. But all it is really is just a case of thinking. And one last point I want to mention before I want to, bring up another question for you guys is ultimately what's required is for Muslims to kind of fix up. And, you hear some people talk about the Palestinians are being punished because of X, Y, and Z of shirk and all this sort of stuff, right? SubhanAllah, the people there, they are the people who they have tasted the sweetness of Iman. They have tasted the sweetness of Iman, and that's why everything else, their lives, their rizq, their families, everything, they're willing to sacrifice it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But the rest of us, we need to really think about, what's our purpose in life and what do we value more? Do we value the dunya or do we value the akhirah? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, look, paraphrasing, that don't think that you're just going to be left alone by saying that you believe without being tested. And if you think about it, this applies to all Muslims. So what the Muslims in Gaza and Palestine are going through, if that's a test, then have we even felt a pinch compared to what they're going through. But there could be that they're being tested in hardship and we're being tested in ease. And that's where the difficulty lies. But one thing I want to mention is I saw this video and I thought it's really important. You must have seen it. It's a young boy and from Gaza, and he's talking about how they cut off the communication and stuff, but they have their communication linked with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think, the rest of the world needs to take, or the Ummah especially, needs to really reflect on this, that, we might have internet, we might have, phone signal, and we have Netflix, and we have all these other things. But how strong is our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do we have that direct link to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And I think that's something that's really important, because if you don't, then are you going to be willing to sacrifice for that which pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And I think we're distracted. And those people there, they haven't been distracted. They don't have anything, but they have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have the hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if the people on the ground who are being devastated, they haven't, lost hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then how can we lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the solutions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us about, given to us, and then look to solutions which are not even from Islam? Why? Because, well, we need to do something. What does that mean then? I mean, to put it in a harsh way, does that mean that we've lost hope in the solutions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us that we need to use to get rid of our problems? Why are we looking to anything else other than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu brought? Do we not have confidence in this? And I think this is, first and foremost, a advice to myself, that we need to look into Islam. We need to understand Islam. We need to understand what is required of us. Is a Muslim someone who just, like everybody else, goes to work, comes home, watch TV for a bit, and goes to sleep? Is that what it means to be a Muslim? Or does being a Muslim come with some heavy responsibility, not just for yourself and not just for your community, but for the entire world? And if that's the case, then we can't really continue through life in autopilot. We can't. And that's what I would sort of end this section on, by saying, we need to look at ourselves and we need to understand this issue. This issue isn't just about land, it's about Aqeedah. It's about what's being done there and how we need to play a role in this. And a ceasefire, going back to the original question, certainly doesn't aid any Islamic cause. And I think that probably nails it. It doesn't further any Islamic cause. And for us, do we want to aid any cause which is not Islamic? I think these are the sort of questions that we need to think about. But listen, I got another question which I want to pose to you guys before we end the podcast. And that is that we've seen throughout this month, emotions have been high amongst the Ummah, but I feel that, and it might just be me, I don't know, I'd be good to get your thoughts on this. It feels like emotions are slowly, especially amongst Muslims outside of Palestine, Muslims in the West, I think it seems like the emotions are slowly dying down. And especially if a ceasefire comes in, I think they'll be totally over. I think we'll just go back to normal life. So what my question is, linked to how you guys have spoken about the importance of Palestine and so on, how can we keep the feeling and the emotion strong for the cause of Palestine and the wider Ummah? How do we do that, especially living outside of those regions and living outside of Palestine itself? Affy, what are you saying?
It's a tough one when you look at historically. This is just another event in this long sequence of events that have occurred within Palestine. However, I think I could see a massive difference between the last time and this time. The last time something happened and this time, and the response of the people. And it's, even though the climate of fear now is greater, but people still haven't held back talking about this issue and calling it out for what it is. And not only this, they've been calling out the imams in the mosque, they've been putting pressure on the imams to do something, calling out the MPs and councillors who are affiliated with the parties here. So there's positiveness there. So I think what we need to do is remind people of how they're feeling now and the reality of why they've got that anger towards the people that they're looking to for influence and direction, and why it's not coming. And moving forward, if they continue not to do that, then they are not from amongst us. They're not with us. Like, the kuffar openly say you're either with us or against us. It's clear that these people are not with us. And I think it's just the people's voice has been heard to an extent. I'm talking about the Muslims here, be it by the rulers who are really, really fearing for what the reaction is going to be, and trying to calm it down with these token gestures. So that heat has to stay on. The imams in the mosques are feeling it for not talking about it. That heat has to stay on. So that's the first point. The second point, I think, is perhaps the most critical, right? And it's got two elements of it. We have endless examples of what's going on in the world is a struggle between two ways of life: capitalism and Islam. And you don't even need to look through specific comments or examples to illustrate this point. The non-Muslims themselves are openly saying it. They're saying this is why we created that state of Israel. We need a military base in the Middle East, but we can't have a Muslims as a military base. We can't trust them because they're part of the problem. They're the ones that we're tackling. We need someone of our own. So why was it that they went and created a homeland for the Jews in the middle of the desert and then continued financing it? So there's a war, and we saw it with post 9/11 and since then, and the fact that they're trying to change our books. They're trying to redefine the Quran. You got people who are coming out with dodgy translations and saying this is the best translation ever. Why? What was wrong with the way that Muslims understood Islam for 1400 years? You're saying that they didn't know, and now you come up with a new translation which has redefined jihad as not existing, and it doesn't mean anything, or etc. etc. So in summary, there's a war between Islam and Kufr. It's open. Understand the nature of that war. They're staying true to their criteria. So when we see these double standards from them, as people call it, this is not this double standard. This is their standard. Like you said in one of your videos, this is their standard. Because when they've got an enemy, it's no holds barred. The rule book goes out the window. They will do whatever they have to do to destroy Islam. And yes, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He will protect the deen, and it's His deen to protect, but He's ordered us to be that line of defense, the vanguards of the deen. So we need to understand the nature of that global struggle, Islam, Kufr, and then how these games come into play. And if we ignore that question, we might as well forget it, because they'll get away with what they're trying to do. Will be held accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll have no excuse, and then whatever we have coming our way on that day, we deserve it. And I think that's what we have to constantly remind everyone of. For everyone on this earth is here to face our Maker on that day of judgment. And if we're not using these current events to redefine that balance now in our favor, all right, we can't change the past, but we can change how we prepare now with whatever life we have left to face our Maker. It's stupidity if you don't do it. So yeah, it's those elements, really. Re-understand that balance and turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tells us that in this book, He has the answer to everything. He has completed our deen till the day of judgment. We don't need another messenger. We don't need another prophet. The previous generations had it. They needed one, but He completed our deen for us. So we have the solutions to all of our problems. And if we reject those solutions in favor for man-made systems, then I hate to say is to see what state we are going to be in on that day.
Subhanallah. Some really, really good points there, and it's actually triggered off a few thoughts for myself. But I just want to get Ishi's thoughts on this first before I sort of like come back and address some of your points.
I think going back to to the point, obviously emotions are high, and it's been brought about because of all these videos, all this information that's circling about, and it's caused this reaction. But saying what going back to that purpose of life, understanding how this situation affects our purpose of life, our Aqeedah, our Iman, is what links us to the people of Palestine. It's not nationality to us. They're our brothers, right? They're our brothers in deen. They're not like, Bob from down the road. They're actually our brothers, right? And they have a right on us. But understanding that purpose, yes, there will be times where it's bad. Why? There's times where it's good, but there will always be that concern. What is happening with our brother? Think about what the Americans are. They are brothers with the Israelis. As soon as they heard, they brought those ships about to protect them. They're behaving as one body because they're creedally linked, and our iman is linked with that land and those and our brothers, right? So first, if you okay, this has happened, but understand what is our purpose, and then understand what your purpose is in this situation, right? What is your role and responsibility? If you don't know what it is, understand what you are. If you're a good talker, then talk about it. Learn the history of the situation, spread it to your family, spread it to your friends. But also there's another aspect. In the time of the battles of the Prophet ﷺ, what used to be a benefit is you'd understand the reality of the people on the ground. Are they with you or against you? And now I'm not saying that these are the people are munafiq, right? But we understand the reality. There are some who are unlearned and they don't understand the situation, and there are some who are against us. We cannot afford to forget this. There are people with armies, they've got money, they've got wealth, they've got everything. And what have they done? They've helped the other side. So are they with us or against us? We can't forget this, right? At the end of the day, who's giving their airspace? Who's willing to normalize? We need to make a note of this because we cannot ask them. Number two, we need to understand the reality of what's been used against us and used for us. This international law only serves their purpose, right? We need to understand that we're calling for something that only serves their purpose and has been used to police us and damage us, right? For anyone who calls on that is either a fool or insane, right? There's no in between there, right? The other thing I would say is, there's a lot of people saying make dua this, and it was part of what I was saying about the nobility of the Prophet ﷺ, right? What did the Prophet ﷺ? It wasn't just any old dua, right? It was make that change happen by our hands. Make that change happen by our hands, not just a facile list or just let the change happen. Because this is what the history of the Jews did. You and your Lord go and fight. You and your Lord go resolve the issue. But we are the believers. We submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That means we want that change to happen and we want that reward. And I think that's the most important thing. And at this moment, we need to spread that information, make that change. Second thing, mashallah, the believers, the Muslims have realized their power, their voices, okay. So they've been boycotting because they understand it affects the interests of the capitalists. It affects their capital interests, right? But we need to now look at what the Islamic solutions are, what the real problem of our situation is, that we're 50 plus nations when we should be one nation. This is how we need to start looking at this. We need to ask ourselves, we are Muslim, what does Islam say, and what are the solutions, as Affy alluded to? So yeah, those are my few points I think are worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely worthwhile, bro. Definitely worthwhile. And I think for myself, it's always a tricky one because these things happen all the time, don't they? I mean, in if you're talking about Palestine, I mean, the stuff cracking off in India, we see the videos coming out, we see the videos from Kashmir, Uyghur Muslims, but certainly with Palestine, with Palestine, I think that before this stuff kicked off, I always felt like there's probably a lack in the understanding of the Muslims worldwide on the Ummah in regards to how important the blessed land of Palestine is, and Masjid al-Aqsa, and what it means to Muslims. However, I've kind of shifted a little over the last couple of days in regards to what I think where is a lack of understanding, because I think Muslims generally know Masjid al-Aqsa, they know about Isra Miraj. However, it's not really, the Muslims outside of the Muslim land, Muslim lands and outside of Palestine haven't really been able to change much through their actions, right? Even though they know the importance of this land. And I think what it comes down to is something more fundamental. I think it comes down to the fundamental understanding of Islam, the fact that Islam is a complete way of life, complete systems of life, the fact that the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't sent to just convert people, he was sent to establish the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the earth. And even in the early days of Mecca, when the people asked him, what is it you want? And he said one kalama, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, right? And they said, listen, we can't give you this, and all the world will fight you for it. Because they understood what it meant, that Islam has to be implemented, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created human beings have problems, and the creator who has created the creation is giving you the solution and the way, the treatments on how to solve these problems. That is what Islam is. So it governs your private life, it governs your societal life, it governs your relationship between the ruler and the subject, and so on and so forth, right? And if we can understand this, and then we will understand throughout history that the mission of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was to take Islam to the four corners of the earth, is to take people out of the darkness and into the light, to liberate man from shirk to Tawheed, right? So that the Muslims were always on the front foot. This was their mission, this was their objective, which was to take Islam to everyone. If people can understand Islam like this, then they will look into history and see, well, what happened? They will see that there were many different faces of the enemies over time, but the war was quite consistent between Islam and Kufr. But it changed from the pagans of Quraysh to the Crusaders, to the Zoroastrians, and to the capitalists, as we see today. And then we can see that this implementation of Islam came to an end in 1924 officially, where now the Muslims never had this system which was sent to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on how to live our life and how to protect ourselves and how to deal with all of the challenges that life throws at us. So now we see what replaced it. We can see that other nations came on the scene. You had the Cold War between two ideologies of capitalism and of communism, and we see that the Soviet Union was defeated, and then we had the New World Order, where now America was the sole superpower and capitalism was the ideology which was going to rule the world. However, the problem they had was with the Muslims, a people who had a belief system, but the system wasn't being implemented. But these people were the only resistance and obstacle for the capitalists to actually make the ideology of capitalism and liberalism the ideology of the entire world. So this is how we should see this struggle, a struggle between way of lives, a struggle between Islam and Kufr. And then if we can understand that and then link it to the point Affy made, which was, why was the state of Israel created in the first place? The capitalists just used the Zionists for their objective, which was to set this cancer up in the heart of the Muslim land to be as I shared a video a few days ago, Robert Kennedy Jr., I think that's his name. He said basically Israel is a aircraft carrier for the US, right? But when it was set up originally, it was with the British. The British had this in mind. And as Affy said, Theodore Herzl made it clear that what their aspirations were of being like this European entity in the heart of the Muslim lands to spread its culture and so on. So when we understand this, and I know this is really going the long route, but I think, this is still short in the context where people need to do their research. If you can understand why Israel has been designed and created. As you know, Biden said that if there wasn't an Israel, we'd have to invent one. It's to serve the purpose of the capitalists. So it's another tool that's being used in the ongoing battle between the ideology of capitalism and Islam, to subjugate the Muslims, to incorporate this entity, to normalize it in the region, to bring stability in the region, but not for the sake of stability, but for the sake of the American strategic agenda, interests in the region. Now, if you can understand that, and then you take this back all the way back to what I mentioned, what Islam is, that there is this ideological struggle between the good and the bad, the good and evil, the haqq and the batil, Islam and kufr. You can see that what's happening in Palestine is linked to the greater struggle. And that greater struggle, who are the sides in this greater struggle? There are those people who are the kuffar, and then there are those people who are the people who have iman, the Muslims. And that includes every single person who's a Muslim, who has a role to play in what's happening. Now, if we can understand that what's happening in Palestine is part of a greater game, then it doesn't matter whether there's a ceasefire, it doesn't matter whether they set up some two-state solution, right? Artificial two-state solution on the ground. It doesn't matter where all the leaders normalize, even though the people don't accept normalization. It doesn't matter, because the struggle continues. If we can understand that, I think then whether people are being killed, whether hospitals are being bombed, I think we will understand that there's a battle going on and that we have to play a role. I know that was a really long-winded way of putting it, but I've just thought about it, and I was thinking that, you know, the purely emotional angle of what Al-Aqsa means, it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. To the extent where I might get a lot of hate for this, to the extent where sometimes, you know, when I've seen what's happening and I've seen the desecration of Al-Aqsa, I've questioned myself thinking, if tomorrow Mecca was attacked, would the Muslims move? Because Masjid Al-Aqsa, man, it's not a joke. And just because it's the third holiest mosque, it doesn't mean it's not important. It's very important, right? But the issue is greater than that. The issue is greater than that. And to this, I think Muslims need to have an understanding of the seerah. They need to have an understanding of the Quran. They need to read the history, what the Sahaba did, what the Tabi'een did, the Tabi'een, and the generations after, and then reflect on their own life, their own purpose for life, what they're living for, the things they value. And I think people will start to come to an answer. There's a disparity there.
Yeah, agree.
But guys, inshallah, I think on that note, I'm going to get your final thoughts anyway before I close the podcast, bring it to an end. Ishti, I'll start with you, bro. There may not be, but if you've got any final thoughts that you want to share, please go ahead.
No, I think you said everything that needed to be said in that conclusion. I just think after the ceasefire, as we've said, that, you know, we need to understand the situation, what's really at play, and understand what our influence and how we can influence this situation. Because this is what it's shown. We can make a change. We can make a difference. We've got the resources, and now we need to make that a reality.
Jazakallah khair. Affy?
Oh man, I can make so many, but I'm gonna try and make it brief, and then by all means stop me. Right? I think we've been discussing Palestine, but the root cause of the problem is bigger than Palestine, right? And this is where all of us need to have a long, hard look at ourselves, right? And you know, the people in Palestine, when we're looking at them and we look at their bravery and their resilience and their tawakkul and their trust in Allah, and you know, it reminds you of Sumayya radiallahu anha when she was being tortured, And Muhammad ﷺ said, I have nothing for you, but Jannah is yours. And she said, I can see it. She didn't say, well, man, being tortured, you're going to call for a ceasefire or whatever, right? She goes, I can see it. If this is the reward for what I'm going through, I'm happy for it. And it's the same thing we're seeing from our brothers and sisters in Palestine, right? And what we need to learn from them is that commitment. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala require from us? Because like I said, put Palestine aside, we are all going to die and we're all going to be held accountable. And we will be held accountable for how we live this life in relation to the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to do it. They're doing their bit. They've got it easy, to be honest. Let's be honest, they've got it easy because they're facing the hardship. They've got no choice but to face it. And as like you said, when we're living in comfort and ease, it makes it more difficult, but less of an excuse, right? So we need to think about what do we want for ourselves in the hereafter, and then automatically the solutions for Palestine will come into place, because the way to fix our life is the way to resolve the Palestinian issue. And I hope people just reflect on that, because it's because like I said, Islam is complete. Islam gives us a solution for everything. It gives us a solution for how we will get into Jannah, what we have to do to get in there. And from there is the same solution for Palestine as well, because Allah's ordered us, like you said earlier on, with the Islamic solution. I just want to give an analogy, right? Just finally, just 2 minutes. And it's something that we were talking about. And I was reflecting on this. We're not going to have, Muhammad was the last messenger for a reason, right? Because the proof of Muhammad's messengership, or whatever the word is here today. We can prove he was the messenger of Allah because we have the Quran that was brought by him, which was the miracle that we have till the day of judgment. So everyone today knows Muhammad was the messenger, even though they weren't there. And if you look at the Banu Israel historically, they had prophet after prophet. And in fact, they knew the prophets were there. They knew they were prophets. And we know the example of Musa alayhi salam, that when he went up to the mountain and he came back, knowing that he was a messenger of Allah, they reverted back and carried on worshipping the cow. And I draw parallels with today, that do we really want to be known like being Banu Israel when we got the truth? We know Moses was the messenger. We know the Quran is the word of Allah. Yet, because the messenger isn't here with us today physically, we're referring to Taghut, to Kufr for our solutions. And we expecting on the day of Jummah we're going to be okay with this? So it's a personal message, because like you said, bro, it's not about Al-Aqsa anymore. This is about where people need to take a long, hard look at ourselves and what is it that we want from this life and what do we want from the next one.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair, bro. To both of you, really, some fantastic points. And one last thing I want to just finish off with, based on what Ishti said, and it's just a message that, as an Ummah, we have to understand that we are powerful. We have the resources, we have the capabilities, but we are shackled. And until we don't remove and break the shackles, then the situation isn't going to change. But what we don't want to do is be in a place where we feel like we are weak, we are inferior. We are not. We have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on our side. We have Iman. We are the best nation sent to mankind. That's who we are. So we are not inferior to anyone. We are the best nation. We have the power, but we're shackled. And that's the last message I want people to take away from this, and just reflect upon it, that no matter our resources, no matter our power, as long as we're shackled, then we can't do anything about anything, and we will see further humiliation. And as the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, that the people will come to the table and they will just pick the food as they like, and that's the Ummah, and that's how we are at the moment. But if you think about it, and the link between the shackles and the link between the hadith, is when the Sahaba, when they asked them, because this was shocking to them, when they asked the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they asked him that, why will we be few in number? Like, why would this be the situation, And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, you'll be many, like the froth on the seabed, but you will have wahan in your heart. Wahan being the love for this life and the hatred for death. So why I link that to the issue of shackles is that yes, we're powerful, yes, we're shackled, but until we don't decide to break those shackles, until we make the love for the hereafter more than the love for the dunya, nothing is going to change. We're not going to be able to break the shackles. So it's a choice that we need to make. It's a personal choice. It's a choice on the ummah level that we need to make. On that note, guys, Jazakallah khair for joining me, and really benefited, like I always do, from everything you guys have said, the points you've made, and I'm sure that people who have listened and watched this will feel the same. However, I know the topic was quite controversial, and maybe people haven't, totally agreed or agreed at all with what we've said. So, in the video on YouTube, please leave your comments, and we'd like to hear your thoughts, and hopefully to try thrashing out any issues that we may have. So, guys, Jazakallah khair. And on that note, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.